innovation our global brand? If you take a step back, how Canada's viewed internationally, Mounties, which we actually sold to Walt Disney. Hockey, which we actually also sold to Walt Disney. Minerals and resources, which we pretty much sold to everyone else. And coffee, and we're about as far from any coffee-producing nation as anyone in this world. But is Canada's brand one of innovation? Canada is actually a country born of innovation. Could you imagine being a trapper, portaging across what this country would have looked like all those many years ago, and then on top of that, creating what would be at the time the largest retail enterprise in the Americas? Alaska, Canada, continental US, Hawaii. Who in Hawaii is buying beaver pelts and striped blankets? And what did that spawn off? You say, okay, well, they created the Hudson's Bay Company that exists today and it's owned by Americans. But it also spawned off a series of other large national retailers. It drafted behind it families which were the parents of Canadian industry. The effects that came out of that lasted well over 100 years. We still feel the effects of what those families, what those monies brought today. Alexander Graham Bell, the father of modern telephone. The ability to create a phone, to innovate a single idea, not that that's easy, but to take that idea and then to create upon it industry which spawned off a company by his name that still exists today. Nortel, which was at the time a global brand in telecommunications innovation, and their own, missteps in the late 1990s, 2001, notwithstanding. The ability for an idea to not only create an idea, but to create a corporation upon which an ecosystem of ideas can continue to grow is what Canada is all about. The Avro Arrow. One of our innovations that's known for two reasons. One, for what it was. What it was an aerospace technology marvel beyond which anything that existed at the time. But also for what it wasn't. And what it wasn't is it wasn't a catalyst for Canada to become an aerospace innovation giant. And are we heading back to the future? We talked about the Avro Arrow. We think about our medical practitioners in the 70s and 80s. When that IP leaves, when that knowledge base leaves, what's left in its wake is a vacuum. And worse than a vacuum is those individuals who leave continue doing what it is they're doing, continue innovating and creating that knowledge base somewhere else. And behind them drafts those other people who otherwise would have stayed in Canada to continue to innovate and drive that innovation. And the fear is, that's not felt, the effects of that isn't felt today. It isn't felt tomorrow. The effects of that are felt a generation, 5, 10 years down the road. And are we potentially walking in and in the midst of an IP brain drain in Canada right now? The effects of which, again, won't be felt today or tomorrow, but can be affected. The effects of which will feel much, much sooner. And as we move into a knowledge-based economy, what will that mean for us? What's the challenge? What's happening? We tend to tout this statistic. 1 in 4 acquisitions of Microsoft, Google, and Apple in the last 10 years has been Canadian. That's great. We're punching way above our weight. We're a tenth the size. Meanwhile, they buy a quarter of our companies. We're great. We're smart. We're selling our knowledge-based assets. We're losing that IP. We're losing the global brands that those companies could produce. We're losing the draft of an economy that falls in behind those corporations. And that's a corporate stat. They're also taking our top talented people. Those brands have a great power to draw. Add on top of that valuations. Valuations right now are great, right? It's a great time to sell. It's a feeding frenzy. It's a funding frenzy. Acquisitions are happening at a more ferocious rate than we've seen in well over a decade. The challenge is Canada isn't acquiring. We are being acquired. And finally, brand and the power of brand. We are a brand-driven culture, no matter how you slice it. The phone we use, the laptop, the clothes we wear, the car we drive, the conferences we come and see are all driven by brand. Brands drive corporate valuations, they drive their PE, they drive followership, they drive a CEO's salary. And what are the global brands that are standing up right now against our US competitors or our US counterparts? We have RIM, global multinational brand that's very well recognized, or the BlackBerry brand. But who's standing shoulder to shoulder with RIM in a game of brand Red Rover against the US? That's the challenge we face today. And that is what we need to be developing. So why is this happening? Even if you are that corporation that says, I'm going to shun the evaluations, I'm going to shun the US brands, how do I grow? I'm a small enterprise. Canada's very well, 0 to 50, $100 million. But how do I get beyond that? And I'm driven to the US or other regions, and we've heard that today over and over, to sell. Canada's a country of large market companies and small market companies, but we have a vast gap in the mid-market. And so to feed that, to grow, we need to look outside of our country for revenue. We're also living in a place where the US is really driving to an innovation culture. Earlier this week, Obama basically came out and stated, we want to attract the top talent, regardless of where they're from, to the US to create the US as the global capital of a knowledge-based economy going forward. Not just the ability to attract talent, but to create a concerted community, a sense of belonging, government, federal, state, education, private enterprise, private equity, enterprise in both a traditional bricks and mortar company from a clicks-based company, to create an environment where they not only nurture innovation, but they nurture the future global corporations and global brands. And finally, capital investment. Even if I have the ability to sell, even if I have a great environment, I still need money. And at a startup level, Canada actually doesn't do well. Canada does well. On average, we're just shy of $4 million. Startup VC, US is just over 5. 20%, but we're good. Later funding, when companies have time to grow, Canada on average just over 4.1 million. Average US investment over 12. So as we want to grow our corporations now, not only are Canadian companies having to look to the US to sell, they have to look to the US for funding and look to the US for a sense of commonality. And that's really how we have to, and what we need to do to start fixing the gap that exists in front of us. We sit in probably outside of Russia, one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. We sit on land that is full of resources. We stand next to trees and pulp and paper. We swim in fresh water, unparalleled globally. We have a revenue base that's behind us, not unlike the Google revenue base that's driven off of its advertising-based revenue. A reoccurring revenue stream, and as long as we don't completely destroy it, of course, that can help fund and grow out new knowledge-based economies and new knowledge-based corporations to stand up and face off versus other ones. Our ability to throw stones into a pool and see what becomes a tidal wave of opportunity. The investment now that doesn't need an immediate payoff, but can have a payoff 3, 5, and 10 years down the road. Second thing we need to do is really create an environment for multi-level financing. Government at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal, education working together, VCs, and we currently certainly have a very fragmented VC market here in Canada, and how they can all work together, and private industry, all working together to not only fund the inception of ideas, that's the easy part, to fund the growth and ongoing investment to grow the future brands of this nation. And the last thing, and it is a rather disturbing image, is we need to take ownership back of innovation as a brand. And David brought it up earlier. If there's one thing that drives me crazy is this notion of Silicon North. We have the brand equity, have the brand capability, and we have the proven results to have a standalone brand that does not have to tread on a US brand or anyone else's. And on that, I'll let you go.